G'day and welcome to this first video on the Shop Made Tools and Upgrades series. I only started recording since January 2022 for these videos. So I've made a lot of tools and I've done a lot of upgrades before I started recording my builds in the workshop here. So what I wanted to do is put together this series for Shop Made Tools and Upgrades of the things I have done over the years. And there have been a lot of different projects I've been working on. So hopefully some of you will get, something out of this series. So the first Shop Made tools for the series is the 4 F-clamps that you see here on the table. And I don't know if it shows in the video, but these are kind of large F-clamps. They're not the small ones that you find at Home Depot or stores like that. I found that I had some occasions where, particularly building things like my lathe table and mill table, the bigger things where things needed to be clamped together and they needed to be clamped kind of far apart. So that was the reason why I wanted to build these clamps. And as with, most of my projects, I do a bit of research on YouTube and look around for different designs, and then I try and pick all the good things from all the different videos that I've seen and put them into, one design. And in this case, there was another YouTuber who did make some clamps like this. So he made actually 2 different styles. I'll put the links down in the description there. But there were some kind of clamps like this, and I think he had an even bigger and heavier clamp, which would be quite useful in certain situations. So I did actually have a couple of photos that I'll put up on the screen as well. So the first photo here is an image of the parts that I cut out ready to make these clamps. And I used to have this little game I'd play with some friends, and it was can you guess what it is yet? And I'd cut out some bits of parts and material and steel, and I'll put them on the bench and I'll take a photo and I'll send it to them, and to see if any of my friends could guess what I was building. And I mean, it's probably a little bit hard just looking at the pile of steel here as to what would eventuate in the end, and it's a little bit deceiving there as well. I have a piece of wood there, and I didn't actually use wood. I was going to use the wood for these handles at the bottom here, but I didn't use the wood in the end, and I came up with this other design. So it's a little bit deceiving, I guess. But nevertheless, the sizes there are on the parts, and they're in millimeters. But let's have a look at the overall dimensions here that we've got. So the capacity, or the distance that I can clamp up to, is 780 millimeters when it's fully stretched out. The throat, I think it's called the throat, say from the center of the pin, it's about 125 millimeters. So that sort of gives you a bit more distance than what you would find on those cheaper clamps that you would get from the Home Depot. The thread in here is M16 thread, so that's around about 5/8 of an inch. And these bits here do swivel, and how I made those is I welded a nut on the end of the thread up the top here, and then I ground it round. And I had this, I think this was 32 millimeter round stock, maybe it's a bit smaller than that now. But I drilled a hole in there, and then I made up a little ring part. So, it's about a 10 millimeter piece of the same size, and then I welded it around. So I assembled it all together, welded it around, and then ground it all round so it just looks like one piece. And of course then squirt some grease up the end there to make sure it's got some lubrication in there. The thickness of this part is 20 millimeters. So the bar itself is a 10 millimeter piece of steel, 40 millimeters across. but that had to go inside this piece here. So this piece is 20 millimeters, and it's actually made up of 3 pieces. So it's a 10 millimeter piece in the center, and then we have 2 5 millimeter pieces, one at the top and one at the bottom. And then there's a little square 10 millimeter piece at the end here, and that's sort of what makes up that shape for the 40 millimeter bar to slide through. And that's all been welded together, and exactly the same was done up at the top end there as well. So, you know, a center piece of 10 millimeters, 2 5 millimeter strips on the side, a little square in the back, and then of course there's a plate being welded on the end where you do your work holding. So I've dug out a few photos of the projects I've done and where I've used these clamps. So you see here the first one, it's one of the legs for one of the benches that I've been making, and there's some square plate that needs to go on the end there. Probably has a thread in it for one of the screw and feet. So I put the F clamp in the vise there, and I was able to clamp up the leg and tap the square plate into position and weld it in place. The next one here is when I was building my milling machine table, and I needed to clamp all the stuff together. And you can see I've used a variety of different clamps here. I've got the 90-degree clamp down the far end, you know, a little G clamp or C clamp, depending where you live in the world, I guess there. And also the F clamp going down the whole length there. And you can see that it's just long enough. It's right at the capacity there, so I was quite lucky on that occasion. In fact, I had to go inside the far end tube down the end there. But anyway, it you know, worked good for that situation that I needed to work for. And the last one here, this is a bit of a funny one really. It's I made one of these F clamps first, and then I built the other 3. And you can see that I'm using the one that I already made to hold you know, the plates down to weld them up on one of the other clamps that I was building. So yeah, that's a bit funny, like robots making robots. Now I know what you're thinking. I've got all these really big F clamps. Where do I store them? Do I just chuck them under the bench, or, you know, where do they get stored? Well, the tools that I make, I hang most of them on the wall actually. It just gets them up and out of the way, and they're not sort of, you know, forgotten about under benches. I built this frame here, and the clamps fit into the frame, and it works out really good, and they're easily accessible whenever I need to use them. So there it is, the 4 F clamps for the first shop made tools and upgrades video. Thanks for watching.